Actually not going to be discussing Parshat Shmini. We're not going to read Shmini. This Shabbos, we're reading the Pesach reading. Next Shabbos, we're reading the Pesach reading. So in 3 Shabbosim, we'll be reading Parshat Shmini. So we will leave Parshat Shmini for next week when we will not be getting together Tuesday morning. Right. And the week after, we will resume with Parshat Shmini. It's interesting to note that there are times that we in Israel go off kilt in terms of our Torah reading. And this Pesach is going to be one of those examples. Right? We all read Parshat Tzav this past Shabbos. We're all up to Shmini. This Shabbos, we all have the first day of Pesach. Okay? And therefore, none of us, neither we here in Israel, we here in Irvine, United States, or them in Israel, are going to read the regular Parsha of the week. The next week, Israel has its 7th day of Pesach on Friday, and then Pesach ends. Shabbos is a regular Shabbos for them. They will therefore read the regular Parsha Shmini, the regular Torah Parsha reading. We, outside of Israel, we keep 2 days of Yom Tov. So for us, Friday and Shabbos is still Pesach. So Shabbos, we're going to read our special Pesach 8th day Torah reading. So we will not read Parshat Shmini until the week after. Okay, so we are off kilt until we get to the point, I'm not sure exactly when it is, where we will have a double Parsha, they will have a single Parsha, and then we will be in sync once again.
Why is it that we do that?
Okay, so why do we keep the 2 days of Yom Tov? Okay, the historical reason that we kept the 2 days of Yom Tov, good morning, how are you? The historical reason we keep the 2 days of Yom Tov is that in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in the time of the temple, the Jewish month, the new moon, was determined by witnesses coming and giving testimony that we saw the new moon, so to speak, right, emerge. Okay? Now, and lunar month is 29.5, etc., etc., etc. days. So either the month is going to be 29 days and the 30th is Rosh Chodesh, is the new month, or it's going to be 30 days and the 31st, right? Now we have a set calendar. Then it was determined by witnesses coming. Okay. Now, when the witnesses would come, word needed to be sent out to the diaspora. Originally, the way word was sent to the diaspora was very simple. They'd go up on a mountain and start lighting these fires, and fire, bonfire to bonfire, mountain to mountain, until all of Bavel, people would go up onto their roofs and wave their torches, and that way at the last mountain they knew that the word had been delivered all the way to the Jews in exile in Babylonia, and we were good to go. However, there were some people, called the Tzedukim, who wanted to offset our calendar. They had different interpretations of different verses, and therefore they would try to engineer the calendar a certain way, so they would do these false alarms. They would wave the fires when it wasn't Rosh Chodesh. Now you have no way of doing a forensic check. Is that a legitimate fire? Is that a fake fire? Right? And therefore, instead of the fires, we had to send messengers. And the messengers need to be people who had credibility, who were known, and therefore they would not be part of this attempt to alter the dates. Travel took a long time then. And let's say Rosh Chodesh, let's say Pesach. So Rosh Chodesh was back on, was it on Thursday, Friday? I forget. Okay, whenever Rosh Chodesh is, they need to get there.
Over Shabbos. So
Yeah, they need to. Yeah, that's right. They need to get there by Pesach, by Passover. They didn't get there by Passover, so therefore the Jews there in the exile are wondering, was Rosh Chodesh, was the new month on Shabbos, and therefore Pesach is on Saturday, on Shabbos, 2 weeks hence, or was Rosh Chodesh on Sunday? In which case, Pesach will be on Sunday. They didn't know which day was Rosh Chodesh. So they didn't know which day was Pesach. And therefore they had to keep 2 days. That's why they did it then. Nowadays, A, we have a set calendar. B, we have excellent communication. Right? As I was driving to shul this morning from my cell phone, I called my son in Israel, and he was on some bus in Israel on his cell phone, and we're having a conversation. It's just astounding, the potential that we have now. So it's not a concern anymore. Nevertheless, the Talmud says, Minod avatenu biyadenu. We carry on with the custom that we have. But why is that? So some of the Bali Musa, some of the great latter-day Rabbanim have explained, based on a Zohar, based on a teaching of the mystical Zohar, that, because by Rosh Hashanah is a whole different issue, that here, present day, in Israel, one day of Yom Tov, one day of the holiday, you could feel it and you soak it in. We, outside of Israel, we need extra days, right, in order to feel it, in order to sense it, in order to be impacted by it. And that is why the sages back then established that even though we know which day Rosh Chodesh is, we're no longer based on testimony of witnesses. And if we were to be based on testimony of witnesses, right, we would have a cam set up, and we would actually hear them giving their testimony. We would hear the Beit Din real time saying Mekudash, Mekudash, the month is sanctified, the month is sanctified, the month has begun. We would have that, we would know that. Nevertheless, we keep 2 days. And that's why, again, our 8th day of Pesach, right, is going to be just Shabbos in Israel, and that's going to throw us off key a little bit.
Some answer.
You asked?
That's a great answer.
I mean,
Is this
okay.
on? Is this on?
Yeah.
Is it?
It's on, Dov, is that correct? Okay.
Anyone?
Now,
I hate to lose that answer.
what I'd like to do today is a bit of an understanding about Pesach, and Rabbi Sachs gave a great online shiur, and this is drawing from that and from some other things also. The very first mention of Matzah in the Torah. The very first mention of Matzah in the Torah is in Bereshit, not in Shemot, not in the book of Exodus, but it's found in Bereshit, on page 84, page 85. Of all places. This is Parshat Vayera. Vayera is where Abraham, after his circumcision, is recovering, and he's by the tent there, hoping for some passers-by, and Hashem, seeing that he wants these passers-by, sends these 3 angels in the guise of men. And we hear about Avram's amazing hosting of them. Why are there the 3 angels? One of them is to let him know that Sarah, his wife Sarah, will give birth. Another one was to heal Avram. And another one was to go and overturn Sodom. Now they're on their way to overturning Sodom. And they comes to Sodom. And it is not the most welcoming of places, with the exception of Lot. Right? So, chapter, Pasuk, well, let's take it in English. Take from chapter 19, Stu.
The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. Now Lot saw and stood up to meet them, and he bowed face to the ground. And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn about, please, to your servant's house. Spend the night and wash your feet, and wake up early and go your way. And they said, No, rather we will spend the night in the square. More?
Mm-hmm.
And he urged them very much. So they turned toward him and came to his house. He made a feast for them and baked matzahs, and they ate.
Okay. He baked matzahs, and they ate. Now, what did Avraham feed him? If you look back, Avram and Sarah, if you look back at the beginning of Vayera,
Let them eat cake, right?
right? So there, yes, though. Right? Let them eat cake. Right? So if you look at that on page 79, so Abraham, verse 6, Pasuk Vav, Parak Yudchet, Pasuk Vav. So Avram hastened to the tent to Sarah and said, Hurry, 3 sa'as, measures of meal, fine flour, knead and make cakes. And Avram ran to the cattle, took a calf tender and good, and he gave it, right? So there, they're preparing cakes. Okay? Now these were not the Manischewitz Pesach variety cakes. This was, we can imagine, the real cakes. Right? Now, Lot is making matzot. Rashi back on page 84. So Rashi says, Umatzot afa, he baked matzot. Rashi says, Pesach haya. It was Passover.
By the time we got to Lot, it was already Pesach.
I'm sorry?
By the time we got to Lot, it was already
Right. By the time he came to Lot, it was already Pesach time. Therefore, what do you do on Pesach? You eat matzah. The problem with that, my friends, is
We haven't had it.
we haven't had it.
We haven't been in Egypt either.
We haven't been in Egypt. We haven't gone out of Egypt. We weren't in a rush. And the bread didn't leaven. Right? What in the world does Pesach have to do over here? Right, the English, for those who are right, easier to follow, in the English on page 85, beneath the line where we have the commentary, the bottom of the second column, matzahs, the angels came on 15th Nisan, the date that would later become Passover. Rashi. Thank you, Rashi. But what does that tell me? What are we talking about over here? That's later going to become Passover. So that's why he fed the matzah? It seems to be astounding. Let us now jump forward to Shemot, and then we're going to double back a little bit. Shemot is on page 362. Okay, so let's take first some in Hebrew. Savyon be'ivrit.
My biblical Hebrew is not so good.
Which pasuk?
Pasuk Dalid. Savyon, give us one pasuk. You got it. Just one pasuk. Hayom.
Hayom atem yotzim lechodesh ha'aviv.
Beautiful.
V'haya ki yalecha.
Hashem. Eretz.
Eretz Haknani. V'hechiti. V'amri. Hemri. V'hachivi. V'hayevusi. Asher nishba לאבותיך, וצק לך ארץ זבת, חלב ודבש, ועבדת את העבודה הזאת בחודש הזה. Beautiful. Okay, this pasuk is really, it's as an aside, it's very, very interesting. Today you are leaving. Verse 4 in English. Someone take 4 and 5 for us in English, please. Take it, Andrew.
Sure. Today you are leaving in the month of springtime. And it shall come to pass when Hashem shall bring you to the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, which he swore to your forefathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey. You shall perform this service in this month.
Okay, so this is telling us all about what we'll need to do starting this Shabbat with Pesach coming up now. But it said today you are leaving in the month of springtime. Actually, this verse is the source for our having a leap year. Let me explain. As we mentioned before, a lunar month is 29 and a half days. So a lunar year of 12 months is 354 days. The solar year is 365 days. So on a lunar year, we lose 11 days every year. The Muslims also follow a lunar calendar without any correction, and therefore they lose 11 days every year, and their holidays, if it started in spring, moves to the winter, moves to the fall, moves to the summer, and then will move back into the spring. Their holidays are non-seasonal connected. We are told we left B'chodesh HaAviv, and therefore you must celebrate this, right, in this month. This month, though, must remain in Aviv. Aviv means spring. So this month must remain in spring. From here we understand that even though we are commanded to follow this lunar calendar, but adjustments need to be made in order to maintain that alignment between the lunar months and the seasons to which they are connected. And therefore, 7 out of every 19 years, so if you go, well, mathematically it's going to work out very nicely, right? 19 times 11 is 209, right? 7 out of those 19 years, you're going to add on a month of 30 days, which is 7 times 30 is 210. It's not exactly, right? It's not exactly, 354, right? And that's how we adjust it. So we have an extra month of Adar, right? Every 7 out of every 19 years to keep us aligned to fulfill what the Pasuk says, B'chodesh HaAviv, in the springtime. Why is it important? Why is it important to have this alignment? And that's another very important concept. We view everything that goes on in this physical world as a reflection of what is happening in the spiritual realms. Springtime is a time of regrowth, of springing forth, of regeneration, right? Where the frozen tundra of Irvine is starting to thaw, and these little tentative green saplings are starting to push through the frost and begin again, right? Springtime is a time of rejuvenation here on earth, in the physical world. That is a reflection of what is happening in the spiritual realm. And in the spiritual realm, what is happening is this potential for rebirth, for growth, for renewal, for starting again, for starting afresh. It is that koach, it is that power that we tapped into with Pesach, with the Exodus from Egypt. It was that rebirth that we embraced and fully tapped into and accessed, and that became the holiday of Pesach. Therefore, every year, Pesach time has got to be the Chodesh HaAviv. It needs to be in the springtime. Our Pesach needs to align with that availability, with that spiritual reality. And that is why Pesach, Yitziat Mitzrayim, Passover, the Exodus from Egypt, Mitzrayim also is the same letters as Meitzarim. Meitzarim are our boundaries, that which confines us. Min ha-meitzar karatika. from the depth, from the confinement. I've called out to you, Hashem. King David HaMelech says in Tehillim, says in Psalms. And therefore, we have a Yitziat Mitzrayim, that we have an exodus that we tap into every year. To do that in the winter, it's just a complete misalignment. Right? We're doing something that doesn't fit with that which is there. Each year, every holiday. And this is an important concept we mentioned before. Rav Dessler explains that the Jewish calendar does not start at a point and go out. It is concentric circles, right? Epcot, right? Where you go from country to country, pavilion to pavilion. You enter the pavilion of that country, and you're there then in that country when you enter that pavilion. On our calendar, we enter into Rosh Hashanah. And it's not that Adam and Eve were judged back then, but we enter that pavilion, and now we are being judged every year on Rosh Hashanah. We then travel another 10 days, and we enter the pavilion of Yom Kippur. And it's not that, Yom Kippur, that's the day that God forgave the sin of the golden calf and sent down Moshe with the new second tablets showing we were forgiven. But no, that's the day that we are forgiven. And so on. And we come to Pesach. And it's not that that's when they left Mitzrayim, it's that this is the time for our own personal exoduses. And Shavuot, this is the time not just when they receive the Torah, but it's the time for us personally to receive our portion in Torah. And therefore, if we don't have it aligned, then we are just completely, it's like the pictures you see, tragically, after the major earthquakes that we had over here, and you see the highway just like this, like this, and then it just doesn't align. Right? That's what I have that picture in my mind when I think about having a holiday that's not in the proper season, because the season is a reflection of what's happening in the spiritual realm, and we need to be aligned with that. Yes, Dov?
On that same point, it's like this is the time when the bracha of the produce is coming.
Correct.
Correct.
Yes.
Originally, the 3 holidays that we had in the biblical time, they were all harvest, having to do with seasonal, and so it has to continue.
Correct. But what I'm saying is the reason that they have to do with the harvest, with the different stage of harvest and seasonal, is because that represents different stages, different availability of what's happening in the spiritual realm to which we align ourselves. Yes, Janet?
Would that kind of, in that line of thought, indicate that during the first diaspora, when at the time of Esther, Hashem was completely recessed and receded because they fasted through Pesach, and they didn't. I know that's the theme, that Hashem is hidden, but this might, what you're saying now might emphasize that it was even way more than we could conceive.
Interesting
because they
thought.
Fasted and they didn't do that receptivity. Yes, no.
Possible.
And then just a comment for those who are Southern Californians and who haven't had the advantage of living in Muncie or New England. If you go to Mason Park and you look at the sycamores, they do go through that cycle, and they get the new leafing and
nice.
So the wild part of Mason Park, not the developed part. So if you walk on those paths,
you can see it.
And
good. Let's continue.
During Hol Chamoed, it might be nice to do.
Nice. Let's continue with verse Vav. Okay? In Hebrew, somebody?
Oh, Vav. Okay.
Shivat Yamim?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Shivat Yamim Tochel Matzot Uvayom Hashavi Chag LaHashem.
Take one more.
Matzot Yochel Et Shivat HaYamim Lo Yera'e Lecha Chametz Velo Yera'e Lecha Sor Bechal Gevu Lecha.
Good. In English, 6 and 7, somebody? Don't be bashful.
For a 7-day period shall you eat matzahs, and on the 7th day there shall be a festival to Hashem. Matzah shall be eaten throughout the 7-day period. No chametz may be seen in your possession, nor may leaven be seen in your possession and all your borders.
Okay, this is the famous Lo Yisroel, Lo Matzah, should not be seen, should not be found. And this is the source of all of the cleaning that is going on right now. Okay, and amazing that all you women took off from that to come and study. Okay, matzah should be eaten throughout the 7-day period. That's what we said before. Pesach is actually a 7-day holiday. We keep 8 days here, as we discussed before. The idea of matzah, there are a number of concepts of what is it that matzah represents. Okay, matzah as opposed to the chametz. The chametz is the regular leavened bread. And an explanation that's often given is that the matzah, the chametz, is basically filled with hot air, the proverbial filled with hot air. There's a certain degree of haughtiness, of puffiness, of building oneself up. Whereas matzah is simple, lowly, humble, right? With humility. And at this point of our becoming a nation, we recognize that we're standing humbly before God and that He is bringing about this exodus and making us into His nation. Another very beautiful explanation that's given is the plagues and all that we went through was meant to show us God's hand, God's involvement in all that takes place. The world in which they were living was a world of polytheism. So there, it's the gods that are at war with one another, and they're like these runaway trains, and whatever happens, happens, and you have no control, and there is no real rhyme or reason. This god was angry with that god was angry with this. It was just a world of chance, a world that cannot be predicted, a world of no rhyme and no reason, no overseeing, no orchestration.
Excuse me. Oh no, I didn't interrupt.
Okay, so let me go a little further. Matzah, all that comes about with the matzah comes about from the hands of its maker. There is no growth, there is no movement, there is no reaction that takes place spontaneously. There is no action that takes place on its own. Whatever the maker of that matzah has done, that is what is there. There is absolutely nothing going on besides that. As we were going out of Egypt, as we are starting every year, this time of Pesach, of our revisiting the start of our nationhood, the overwhelming lesson needs to be there is nothing that goes on that is haphazard. Whether we understand it, and most times we do not understand it, but God is orchestrating this world. Nothing goes on outside of the hands of the Maker, with a capital M. As we say, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz miyirat shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heavens besides our awe of heaven, besides the choices that we make and the people that we make ourselves into. That is our realm. That is where we make a difference. Besides that, it is orchestrated by God. And matzah is the perfect representation of the Maker doing and nothing happening outside of the actions of that Maker.
Yeah, I was wondering if we still had the connection with Lot. And making
But
matzah.
we're going to come back.
Okay.
We're going to come back.
Good.
Now let's get to what I wanted to get to. I'm going to read this one in Hebrew if you don't mind. Pasuk Chet. V'higadita lebincha. What does higadita mean? You shall tell. What does higadita sound like with Pesach coming up? Sounds like the Haggadah. Our mitzvah of the Haggadah comes from this word of v'higadita lebincha. And you shall tell your sons, your children, Bayom Ahu, on that day that you left Mitzrayim. In other words, Friday night this year is the 15th of Nisan. That is the day we left Mitzrayim. On that day you shall tell your children, Lemor, saying, Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tseiti mi Mitzrayim. Ba'avur zeh. It was because of this. Asa Hashem li. God did this for me. B'tseiti mi Mitzrayim. When I left Egypt.
When they say this, are they? It's like we're pointing to something.
Well, that's the question. Because of this, Asa Hashem li, God did this for me. B'tseiti mi Mitzrayim. What does that mean? Let's take a look in the Rashi. The bottom of the first column in Rashi, those who can follow in Rashi, and then we'll take a look at what the English has to say. Ba'avur zeh, ba'avur she'ekayem mitzvotav. In order that I will fulfill the mitzvot, kigon Pesach, Matzah umaror halalu. Like the mitzvah of Pesach, that's the Paschal sacrifice, which we don't have nowadays. The Matzah, which we do have nowadays. The maror, the bitter herbs that we have nowadays. It was in order that I will fulfill these mitzvot, Asa Hashem li, that God did this for me, b'tseiti mi Mitzrayim, when I left from Egypt.
That almost feels a little circular, though.
Uh-huh.
Because those are to remind you of that this.
Okay. So we would have thought, were it not for this Rashi, we would have thought, if I ask you, why are we eating matzah on Pesach? What would you answer? Besides this Rashi, right? We haven't started the class. We're just starting the class right now. Why are we going to eat matzah on Pesach?
No time to bake.
Right? When they left Egypt, they didn't have time to bake.
From lunch
and therefore, we eat the matzah. We too. Therefore, they were left with just matzah. Right? Rabbi Sachs, he poses this in the following way. Does history make destiny? Or does destiny make history? Now, what you're saying, the simple understanding is history made the destiny. Meaning, because of the historical fact, the historical event, that we were in a rush to leave Egypt, and therefore the matzah, our breads, did not have time to rise. And we were left with those delicious crackers, matzah, right, with the taste of freedom. And since that happened then, therefore every year we too, now as a result of that history, we have that destiny. And we therefore eat matzah, which became the symbol of freedom, the symbol of the Exodus, the symbol of our nationhood. But the problem that we have with that approach is, well, how long were we in Egypt for?
430 years.
210
It was
years.
supposed to be 4:30.
Right?
I never remember the actual.
210 years. So God couldn't work it out to be 210 years and more than 18 minutes? Right? Those minutes made all the difference. Right? You know, a decent travel agent makes sure to arrange time for each thing that you need. Right?
Also, by Shabbos Hagadol, they knew they were going out.
Yeah, good.
And Pesach is never Matzah Shabbos.
Correct.
So
correct.
they would have had
right.
time.
That was for they knew they were going out. So why was this engineered? Why was this orchestrated in the way that it was? And Rashi seems to be telling us that it's not the history that makes the destiny. It is the destiny that makes the history.
Is he always?
Meaning, we were meant to be eating matzah. Matzah symbolizes the Maker's involvement. Matzah symbolizes humility. Matzah symbolizes, let's take another approach for a moment. This world, we are bound by the parameter of space, and we are bound by the parameters of time. We are bound by time. In the spiritual realm, there does not exist this realm of time. Time is something that, and scientists will say that when did time begin? With the Big Bang. Before that, there was no time. Now, I think, certainly myself, I am so embedded in this realm of time that I don't understand what those words mean. I don't understand what that means that time began. Well, what was there before? Right? At the same time, I don't understand when we say this ever-expanding universe. So, well, what's beyond there? What's it expanding into? I don't understand that either, because I think, I imagine I'm in fairly good company. Maybe I'm not. The scientists here will have no problems at all with all this. But basically
they don't know either.
Okay, being bound by time and space, we can't think beyond that. Ramchal explains the idea of dreams. Most dreams, the Talmud says, most dreams are Dvarim B'Telim, are nonsense. Most dreams are these conglomerations of different things that went on during the day. I always like, when I remember my dreams, to sit down and say, well, where did that come from? I say, oh, I spoke to this person and they said that, and I saw this and I thought of that, and it all came together in this mishmash that made so much sense when it was happening, but now it's so bizarre when I'm looking back on it. But there are times when a person has a dream that is actually something that is happening elsewhere, or something that will happen. Right? Where does that come from? Now, a person wants to say, well, it's just, with all the millions of dreams you have, you're going to get it right once in a while. Okay, I can't scientifically argue with that. But the Ramchal, what he says is as follows. We know that when we wake up in the morning, we say the Moda'ani. We thank God for returning our soul to us. The idea being that just like when a body dies, the soul leaves the body. When the body is in this state of sleep, which the Talmud calls as 1/60th of death, when it's in this subdued state, it too cannot contain all of the soul. And there are parts of the soul that leave the body. At that point, when parts of the soul leave the body, they are now in this spiritual realm. They are able to communicate with other spiritual beings that are not bound by time. And therefore, they might be given shared, some information might be shared with them about what will happen, because what will happen only makes sense in our realm. In the other realms, we say God, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the God's name, the Yud, the Hey, and the Vav and the Hey, that stands for Haya, Hoveh, V'yiyeh. He was, is, and will be. So we understand it. We, the time-bound beings, understand, oh, God was, God is, and God will be. But in fact, that's not what we're saying. It's saying God is, was, is, and will be. Because it's all the same. Again, we can't wrap our heads around that. I can't wrap my head around that. But in the spiritual realm, there is no such thing as time. So therefore, as we are becoming this nation that connects to this spiritual realm, with every mitzvah, with every commandment that we have, every commandment is a conduit, is a pipeway through which we connect to the spiritual realm. So we, as we are becoming this nation, the spiritual nation, and touching the beyond time, we need to condense time as much as we can. And therefore Pesach is all about the rush. And therefore it was orchestrated that we be in a rush, because a rush is as close as we time-bound beings can come to touching that point of being timeless. And therefore the food that we eat on Pesach is absolutely no chametz. It's only matzah. It is this rushed, beyond time sort of food. So therefore, if we are understanding that this is the time to come back to what we had asked before, or what we discussed before about the calendars and about the holidays coming out in Chodesh HaAviv, if there is a time, if there is a season, there's a time on the calendar which is aligned with touching this renewal, this rebirth, which is aligned with touching the timeless, then Pesach must be the time that we do that. Now this was in existence long before we went into Egypt. So it's not the history that shapes the destiny, it is the destiny that shapes the history. And when Yaakov sent Yosef to go down to the brothers to see how they are doing, if you look on page 200, yes. Page 202. When Yaakov is sending Yosef to check on the brothers, verse 14, and he said to him, go now, look at page 203, go now, verse 14, look into all of your brothers, and the flock, and bring me back word. So he sent him from the depth of Hebron, and he arrived at Shechem. Rashi says, let's see, there we go. The English would have it. Take a look on page 202 in the commentaries underneath, the second column, the last paragraph. He's going to be telling us what Rashi says. Me'emek Hebron, from the depth of Hebron, but Hebron is situated on a mountain. Rather, the term Me'emek Hebron, from the valley of Hebron, is to be understood figuratively. Jacob's descendants and Joseph's brothers who sold him into slavery, and what appeared to be his doom was in fact fulfillment, 203, of Eitza Amuka, the profound, deep design that had been confided to Abraham, a man who was associated with Hebron. That's where Abraham was, is buried. That's the tomb of the patriarchs now in modern day Hebron. The name of the city was a reference to Abraham in two ways. Hebron is a contraction of the words Chaver Na'eh, pleasant companion of God. And at the time, Abraham was the only patriarch who was buried in Hebron. And the sense of this design was that Joseph's trip would begin the fulfillment of God's prophecy to Abraham, your offspring shall be aliens in a land not their own. In fact, Zohar comments that Jacob took Joseph to the tomb of Abraham and dispatched him from there. Logically, it would have seemed obvious that Joseph should not have been sent to people who disliked him intensely. If Jacob wanted to inquire after the well-being of his sons and livestock, he should have sent servants to Shechem. That he sent his favorite son is proof that God was acting to carry out his prophecy to Abraham. So therefore, there was this destiny that we would become this nation, this timeless nation. And therefore, in order to bring that about, from the depths of Hebron, from that prophecy that was given to Abraham, that is what spurred Jacob, Yaakov, to send Joseph, Yosef, to the brothers, which of course led to the sale, and of course led to Joseph being brought down to Egypt, and of course that led to Jacob and the other brothers coming down to him in Egypt, and that set the stage for the slavery, and that set the stage for the Exodus, and that set the stage for the Matzah. And therefore, when we say Ba'avur Zeh Asa Hashem Li, God did all this in order that I would perform the mitzvot. That's what Rashi says on page 362. Pesach, Matzah, Maror. All of this was set in order to create, to set the stage for us to have these mitzvot, these connections to Hashem. But it's not because of what happened. It is that is the time of deliverance. That is the time of renewal. That is the time of timelessness. Now, those who are attuned, and I imagine Lot, having been brought up in the house of Abraham and Sarah, of Abraham and Sarah, he had this spiritual connection and understanding, and therefore, on Pesach time, what would he be eating? Matzah. We never left Egypt. Who cares? We're not eating matzah because we left Egypt. This is the time of the renewal. This is the time to become timeless. This is the time of humility. This is the time of recognizing God's hand in all that takes place. And therefore, this is the time that Pesach happened. But Pesach is not the cause of the matzah. It is the pretense. It is the destiny. It is the history that was created by the destiny. When we hear that the patriarchs observed the Torah before it was given, the idea is that there is this spiritual reality. The way I like to explain it, if you have a master architect, he can walk into a building and understand, from looking at the building, understand how it was constructed, what the materials needed to be, what the foundation needed to be, how the foundation needed to have been poured, etc., etc. You could walk in, right? An expert doctor, from the way that you walk into his office, right? He could already start to ascertain where are you at, what's going on inside of your body. And the Avos from the world were able to understand what are the spiritual underpinnings, and that is the Torah that they were observing well before the Torah is given. There are those that explain more simply. Right? I'm taking the Rashi, right? There are those that explain the Rashi over there by Lot, that it was his Pesach. Meaning Pesach is a time of exodus, of deliverance, right? For Lot, why were they here? They were here to overturn the city of stone and to deliver and to rescue, to emancipate Lot from that destruction. So on a simpler level, right? It was his Pesach. It was his time of freedom. But the Rashi over here in Parshat Bo is very, very clear. Ba'avur, in order that I will fulfill the mitzvot, like Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, that is why God did this for me. Yes?
Could you restate the key transition when you said to this timeless, we have to rush to condense time? I missed I was busy listening or thinking, and
so
what was
as
the
we
transition
become a timeless, a nation that touches the spiritual, that's ideally constantly aligned with the spiritual realm and the spiritual world, that which we have through our mitzvot. Those are our pipeline connections. Those are the connections that we have. So we want to take this physical world and the confines of it, and its confines, and minimize that to the greatest degree that we can. How can we, time-bound beings, minimize the effect of time by, the term that's used in the Torah is chipazon, by that rush, by that alacrity, by that just rushing. And therefore, the bread, the staple food of this time is that which is condensed. The time is condensed. So it's not that God, as the great travel agent, couldn't have booked things in a more structured way. This was meant to be booked in a way that we take time and we condense it as much as we can, becoming this timeless nation. Yes, Dov?
Can I argue that the cakes that Sarah baked were also because they were in a rush too?
Ugot are usually not associated with, that's why I mentioned Manischewitz before, but ugot are usually not associated with matzah.
Because they have like the thicker matzah.
Yes.
Could Shabbos also be construed in that sort of way too? Because toward, the time that Shabbos is coming in, we're rushing to get everything done.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, there is also that rush, right? But then once we come, Shabbos, we say that the 6 days of the week correspond to the 6,000 years of creation of the world in its present state, and then we go to the next stage, the Shabbos stage, right? And that the sages say, Mishatarach Be'erev Shabbos yochal b'Shabbos. Whoever works on Erev Shabbos, right, prepares on Erev Shabbos, he gets to eat on Shabbos. Yeah, so we have that rush to accomplish. Actually, and with this we'll end, I don't want to go late today, that the lesson of Shabbos is a weekly lesson. That's why we have it every week. What is the lesson of Shabbos? So it is explained, the explanation is given, that the lesson of Shabbos is the lesson of life. We have a time to prepare, stop. Whatever's been prepared has been prepared. Whatever hasn't been done can no longer be done. And that is life. So we need to recognize that life is finite. It's a time to accomplish, a time to do. And we're given a set amount of time. At a certain point, sun sets, Shabbat begins. And that's a lesson that is hammered into us each and every week. Prepare, stop. And we want to make sure that our life is as filled as it possibly can be with the meaning, with the Torah, with the mitzvah, with the connections, because we are each given a finite amount of time, and no one knows exactly how much time that is. Okay? But we have that chipazon, that we rush and we fill it in, and we touch the timeless. Very good. we'll call it over here, my friends.
Yeah, Shukran.
Shukran.
Yeah.
Next week again, we will not be meeting. We'll meet again in 2 weeks' time. Please God.
But we said Thursday.